Good morning. Thank you for tuning in to Hobby Hi-Fi. Sunday, October 16th. Where did the summer go? As I look out the window here in Wiscasset, Maine, I see a multitude of leaves that have fallen and are continuing to fall. Aside from that, the colors are getting quite vivid, and it's a beautiful thing to see in some regards. So today, what I'd like to talk about, strangely, speaker wire. I guess I'll start by introducing you to one of my favorite speaker wires. And as you see, this is called Cord Speaker Cable by New Concepts. And this is 12 gauge, which is on the large side for home audio. And you can see it's pure oxygen-free copper. Basically, your higher-end cables are going to have some sort of a tight... Why is this blinking on me? A tight... what do you call it, shroud, a tighter wrap to the outside plastic, so that over time what you'll notice is that if you take, and I notice this on clear cables that you can see through, you'll start to see them sort of tarnish. And I've even seen this on cables that purport to be oxygen-free. But oxygen, as you know, as I know, living in Maine with all the rust that I've had to deal with on my vehicles due to salt and various forms of that they put on the roads for melting ice, trying to reduce some accidents and whatnot. Oxygen is not really your friend when it comes to metal. So the tighter they can wrap these, this is pure oxygen, pure copper rather, and the tighter they can wrap that, keep that away from oxygen, the better off they'll be. So the other thing that I really like about this cable, aside from the flashy blue color, is that it's got a bit of a feel to it. I don't know how to explain it other than it feels very flexible, very soft, and sort of velvety. And that's a nice touch. If you're asking me, that even the, your outer plastic, or I'll find the right word for that, is of high quality. And so I find a lot of my stuff on eBay, and that's where I found this one. And I got to say, the old timers, a lot of them would swear by lamp cord. So you go into your hardware store and you say, give me some, lamp cord, like if you were going to rewire a lamp. And you may in fact find some pretty high quality cable there. And it's always a nice idea to, and I wish I had, bared one of these so that you could see how shiny, and maybe I'll do that before we're done. But once this is stripped, you can really see that the quality of the copper that goes into this is a little bit above normal. And a lot of cheap cables will coat their metals with I don't know whether it's copper clad or what it is, but it's just, you can really tell a good cable if you hold it in your hand and you look at it, and it's pretty apparent. The reason that I decided to invest in a little bit more cable, God knows I've got enough cable around here, is because I've got a couple of old sets of speakers that seem to want spade lugs, and that's what these are called. And as you know, I'm a huge fan of banana plugs. So let's see. So this is a banana plug. Focus. Got a little hair on the end of that. And a lot of the amps and speakers nowadays have a, is it gone? Focus, hocus, focus. Anyway, let's see if I can get over here in the sunlight a little more. Yeah, the hair is still there. But these are a time saver. I'll tell you, when especially when you're dealing with more modern amps and speakers, a lot of times, and the higher end ones will have 5-way binding posts on the back, and what that means is that you can basically take a banana plug once you've got this, and I bought these this way with these terminated already. But you can see that this spring type of an attachment allows for pressure to be sort of exerted in a uniform way throughout the internal of your standard binding post. And so it'll have, you can see where there's a few places where it may have maybe worn there, which is probably your contact point inside the, and hopefully you're dealing with the same metals. So I understand metallurgically that the transmission, and this is a splitting hairs again, no pun intended, but when you're dealing with metals, I've read that it's a good idea to stay metallurgically consistent. So what that means is that if you're using a gold-plated banana plug like this, then you pretty much want to try to use it with a gold-plated binding post on the other end, so that your metals are matching. And that's a tricky conversation that I guess I won't get into. It is splitting hairs for a lot of people, but I'm going to try to heed and try to stick with my no compromise attitude when it comes to making improvements. Now, like I said, I'm using some older speakers, and a lot of the older speakers either had spade lugs. I'm sorry, well, needed spade lugs, because all they had was a pin with a screw down, which makes it very difficult to wind speaker wire, especially large gauge speaker wire, around that post of the old-fashioned just the pin style screw downs on some of your older speakers like Acoustic Research. But in this case, I was using something out of the 80s set of Pinnacle speakers that just had your standard spring clips, and I should have all this handy so that I can point all of these types of things out, and maybe I will do that over again here, but we'll just get this over with quickly and get to the point. So this is what we call a pin style, and this pin here, you can see the grooves in it, makes it quite handy for those, I like to say, you know, they're just a little bit more of a cheap way of your speaker having, you know, the speaker terminals on your speaker, is to have those spring clips. Now they are handy because a lot of times you can sort of reach in back and access the spring, push down on the little lever, which is spring loaded, and then it kind of clamps with a little plastic thumb holder or whatnot, you know, to get that speaker wire in there. The downside is it becomes more complicated when you don't have these pins when you're doing that, and it's still a two-handed job, because you've got to have one hand to hold the wire and one hand to hold the one hand to hold the the clip to work your spring. So anyway, these pins come in handy for that situation, in that type of hookup, because you're at least not fiddling with bare wire, because as we all know, especially with the larger gauge stuff again, but when you're using bare wire, you have to sort of thread that in through these holes. And when you do that, sometimes you'll hit the sides and you'll push, and you'll have the wire will fray around the around your terminal, which is something you don't want, because you're increasing your chance of a short. So it's always nice to have things clean. I see I'm still going to have to work on this focus setting on this camera. It keeps wanting to focus on the keyboard. I'm not sure what I could do here, but anyway, so this is the old style pin, but I was using those because it was easy, and this is some kind of an off-brand called Cadence cable, and it does had a pretty good feel to it at one point, but I started noticing when I was looking at the cable, let's go back in the sun here, that this had, again, well, it's not going to let me focus up close. I need a macro focus is what I need. But anyway, I started seeing signs of some possible signs of oxidation inside this cable again. And I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to get away from this, aside from the fact that it's 14 gauge cable. So if I can get this to focus, you could see the writing where it says 14. But anyway, couple of different reasons, but yeah, I decided that it was time for an upgrade. And so this thin 14 gauge cable, which actually doesn't even really feel like 14 gauge, but it served me well. It's a few years old now, but I thought, hey, it's time to set up a new set of cables and upgrade myself here and see if I can actually hear the difference. Now, oddly, what I did is I just set up one set of these cables and I ran them to the right channel, and I left the old cable here, the 14 gauge cheaper stuff, left that attached on the left channel, and I decided, well, I'll just see how this works. And a bit different, this, so what we did is we switched. Now we're running one the way I had it, was running one set with these spade lugs and then one set with the old banana plugs to the amp. So it is a different connection, and these are different connectors, different cable, but strangely I thought, and perception is tough when you're in the middle of this, and you swear to yourself, as an avid listener who prides themselves on having a bit of a golden ear and has done, been in this business listening for, I don't know now, 20 or 30 years. 30, yes, let me say 30 years, because I remember in high school somewhere along the line this all started back in the 80s, so it's definitely been 30 years, and soon to be 40. So 30 years in the business, 30 years listening and dicking around with this stuff, and I've learned a few tricks. But before I go any further, I'll say that I thought that these cables here, although higher gauge, higher quality, no oxidation, and a fresh splice on these, a fresh cut into that copper, yielded a bit more of a reticent sound on that one side where I had used these. Now, can you believe that? And I was almost going to call my speaker guru, Roger, and say, Raj, how do you explain a perceived reticence on some brand new spanky upgrade cable on one side and compared to another? And that's why I like to do things like that, is to run one thing, run one way, and then run it on one side maybe a little differently, and see if you can actually tell whether there is any change in improvements or non-improvements. So anyway, I'm going to have to go out on a limb here, and I'm about to put this one, install this one on the left channel, and then I'll have both of these the same. But my mind is telling me that by improving this connection to my amp and to my speaker, because on what I've done on the speaker end on these is left bare wire to deal with that spring clip terminal. So I've got bare copper there, and a higher gauge, so that I'm getting probably some improved surface contact. Surface area has increased in my contacts. And I want to say, a guy like me wants to say that these cables sounded more reticent. Now, reticent is a word that I got from Roger that is one of the staples for describing audio and its appearance to you. And so by reticence, it means that it's a little bit softer, a little bit more understated, and a little bit possibly not as loud. And so why could this be occurring? Well, I thought to myself, I'm going to go back and make another A/B test on this. But in my brain, all of these improvements in the contacts, metallurgically, gauge wise, and otherwise, smoothed out that sound on that one side to the point where I actually thought it was not as loud. But in my brain, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that it may not have been less loud, but it may have been less harsh. And so these are the details that I live my life in. So anyway, before I wrap this up, as you can see what these connectors here are, and this was an item that I had purchased from I think it was eBay, but I don't have an actual manufacturer here to give you. But I can tell you this: these are a large, and I'm going to think that they're probably a 5mm spade lug connection, maybe 4, but I want to say they're quite large is what I'm getting at. So I will see if I can't find that answer. But for a lot of the small pinned vintage speakers, these are a bit on the big side. So these would be used best with an amp or a set of speakers that have a nice fat 5-way binding post, so that there won't be any slop from side to side. So anyway, what you do is you take your speaker wire, and it's so nice and rubbery and easy to work with, that once you've got that trimmed off to about, and you have to kind of adjust, but you can see these pieces here are all about the same size, and I'm going to say they're about a 1/2 inch. And once you get that down, you can see that you've got set screws, okay, on 2 different locations on this tube that your wire is going to go in, which I like, because that is, again, if it is truly gold plated like they say it was, that you're actually getting a nice firm, well, I guess we have violated our metallurgical contact rule when we are inserting copper, pure copper, and into something that is not pure copper, that is most likely gold plated, but also probably full of zinc and maybe aluminum and other metals, tin. I'm sure that these are not, solid 24K gold. So anyway, we have violated that metallurgical rule, but you can see that it is a nice gold-plated surface. And so once you get that trimmed down, and so to the point where you've got the ability to tighten down on the stripped wire on both of these set screws, you will need a small flathead screwdriver, and you will need to tighten that down quite tightly because along with this, they provide a handy sleeve that's got to make its way over those screws, and if they're sticking up too far, then they certainly they won't be able to you won't be able to screw this over it. And then you just screw it all the way down. The ends of these actually come off, so you got to make sure to tighten these. Am I going the right way? Tighten these down so that everything is tight. Bada bing. And there you have a nice spade lug, improved, upgraded, rugged, and we're going to, looks quite nice if you're asking me. And there's my plug for New Concepts cable. Good stuff. I wish I had the manufacturer of this spade lug for you, but they appear to be pretty high quality. And in the back of my mind, even with all this, there is still a bit of a compromise from just the bare cable itself. So you're sacrificing for a little bit of convenience, because all of these things are actually in between. The signal has to, get through all of that gold-plated metal all the way out to this to actually get those electrons moving. But I'm going to say that this is probably a good effort, and hoping to actually see that both sides now have equalized in their volume, and possibly with a little break-in, I will think to myself, yes, I have made the right decision. I have invested the right money and time to improve those little sparkly high-end details on good recordings with a good set of speakers. And that's my goal. Thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe if you're at all interested in seeing the future endeavors. Thanks again.